Mugging in Brisbane, Australia. I was working in Australia for 6 months in the beautiful city of Brisbane. It is on the east coast of Australia, with modern buildings and lots of technology, and it has even hosted a World Fair once in its history. Many parts of the World's Fair still exist, and one enjoyable water/canal attraction brings many tourists. It now has turned into, I think, the Lagoon South Bank Brisbane, at least as I recall. I was very impressed by the city and the people. One morning, I was reading the local newspaper, and they had one that talked about some robber who was running the same scam on each victim. He would approach a tourist, ask what time it was, and then ask if they could spare some coins. Many of the tourists would then bring up their purses or reach into pockets for money. Then the guy would rush them and snag the purse or put his hand into the pocket to find the money. He used the victim to indicate which pocket he carried his or her money. The newspaper asked the public to be on the lookout for this person. So, let me refresh your memory for the 4 steps of a violent attack. First, you are in the wrong place at the right time. Second, you are noticed and approached. Third, conversation, paint the picture option, profanity leads to an attack. Fourth, physical attack. To continue the setting, this guy was working in an area of Queen Street Mall, which now has many of the streets just for people, no vehicles allowed. But the year I was there was 1997, and I was amazed at the wide streets. Well, I think the attack happened on just the edge of the Queen Street Mall, on a street called George Street. So, with my American clothing, I could fit right into the mugger's tourist profile for an attack, and now all I needed to be was at step number 1. I picked Sunday afternoon, at 2 p.m., and I took a taxi a few blocks away from the area where I was going to go trolling for my attacker. I wanted to study the area and the people in it before I started to go fishing. I practiced walking with a limp and had a large Australian hat on with a wide brim so I could cover what I looked at. I didn't want the robber to be able to view my eyes directly until it was time to get mugged. So, I started walking, slowly and with much labor, up one of the wide sidewalks, while all the time stopping to look into the window at their wares. However, that wasn't what I was doing. Instead, I was using the large windows as reflective surfaces so I could look all around me at what might be going on. I can study people coming toward me, away from me, and those crossing the street. I can see if someone is staring at me, too, and that would really mean something if they were. There I was, moving up the street, looking in windows, when I spotted who I thought might be the robber. I was coming up to one of the long pedestrian crosswalks, and he was waiting for the light to cross toward me. So, I went up to wait to cross toward him. If he wanted to rob me, he wouldn't want to do that in the middle of a crosswalk on a busy street, too many eyeballs watching his performance. As the light turned green to walk, I let everyone else go, and just before it turned yellow, I turned and went back to window shopping up the street. The robber, I will call him Bob, didn't cross the pedestrian crosswalk as the light turned red, so he then followed up the street, just like me, and watched what I was doing. He was getting frustrated, and I could tell it. Another crosswalk came up, and I got in line to cross there. And Bob got near the crosswalk but looked at me. He would pick me up as soon as I crossed to his side of the street. I waited as the light turned green, and I started to walk across the street slowly. About halfway, I turned around and went back to the side from which I had started. Bob tried to get into the crosswalk to catch me, but the light turned red. I knew, at that point, I had the bad guy in tow. I continued up the street window shopping, and I passed a pedestrian crossing without trying to use it. Well, Bob darn near sprinted across it to get within 40 feet of me, window shopping. As he approached me, I went into one of the stores where I was window shopping, and he froze in place, watching me shop. He dared not come in as he couldn't rob me inside a store. So, he waited out on the sidewalk. Just standing there for so long, people started to pay attention to him, and he got more frustrated. And I let him really wait as it looked too odd that he was standing there. I had time on my side, and he didn't. He finally left the area I could see, but I was sure he was out there somewhere. This particular store I was in had a back door to an alleyway, and I asked if I could use it. It would be a significant surprise for Bob to see me come back on the sidewalk where he wasn't expecting me. All this was to frustrate him and to mess up his planning of the attack. Once out of the alleyway, I started back up the street. I even passed right behind him. He didn't see me as he was looking into the store's windows for a glimpse of me. I got about 50 feet past him, turned, went out to the curbside, and coughed really loudly. That is when he turned to see what made the sound, and it was me, his mark. He had a shocked look on his face. So, one more technique was to mess with him, and then I set up where he would attack me. Remember, a fight begins and ends in your mind. As you continue listening to this story, please realize that we are fighting with our minds. He thought he was in control of the attack, but really, it was me and my influence from my mind. Something to embrace and consider for your self-defense. Back to the story. He started moving toward me, although he was staring at me the whole time. I looked at him, too, but only in casual glancing. I then moved to the window area of the wide sidewalk, and he followed me by placing himself in a direct path to walk into me. He was truly frustrated, and that was, although he didn't know it, the beginning of my frustration placed on him. Okay, step 1, wrong place at the right time. Yep, got that. Step 2, I got noticed. Yep, I got that too. The next step would be number 3, conversation, paint the picture option. Profanity leads to attack. Now, you notice I could have stopped this attack sequence at the other 2 steps had I wanted, but I tried to stop it at step 3. Why? This is where many of my students might find themselves. They might be just enjoying life and suddenly realize they have fallen victim to the first steps in a violent situation. So, we begin here. Now, at this stage, the attacker will talk to you. They will attempt to communicate and put you at ease. I wanted to continue to interrupt his attack, so I must frustrate him with this step, too. I took a bet, and as he asked what time it was, I said in German, "What are you saying?" or "Was hast du gesagt?" Now, Bob started to say, "What time do you have, mate?" frustratingly. He pointed to his wrist to see where a watch might have been. I now mirrored everything he did, which showed that I didn't understand. I pointed at my wrist, with my watch covered by my long sleeve. I said, "Was hast du gesagt?" and tilted my head. I pointed very hard at my wrist 4 or 5 times, saying the same thing. Now, had he spoken to me in German, I planned to switch to Chinese. However, he didn't speak German, so this ruse was okay to use. His programmed approach and distraction didn't work, and he knew it. So, he went to the next stage of the attack. He stepped close to me and tried to put his hand into my front left pocket. I'm sure he was hoping to find a fistful of dollars there, but he didn't get that far. I pinned his hand into my pocket with the palm of my left hand. Then I reached across, mirroring him, and put my hand into his pocket. He tried to pull my hand out, but he couldn't. I raised my voice as I started to twist into a circle with him, "Was hast du gesagt?" and people began to look at us circling with each other, hands in each other's pockets, and going round and round. Well, he wasn't getting what he wanted, but it was even worse. People were noticing us dancing in a circle in the middle of this wide sidewalk. He finally pulled his hand hard enough that I let it go, and he had pulled so powerfully that he almost flung himself on the sidewalk. I pulled my hand out of his pocket, too. At this point, he had had enough of me. He turned and started to walk away. I said again several times, "Was hast du gesagt?" Now, people were taking notice, and he was uncomfortable. I wanted to mess with his head as he left the situation, just for good measure. When he said, "Oh, $$ hashtag, profanity, off mate," I said, in clear English, "Okay," and smiled right at him. He knew I got him, and he accelerated his pace to get away from this crazy yank. I disappeared into an alley bar and spent 2 hours enjoying my favorite beer in Australia, Victoria Bitters, and they had some tourist stuff to purchase, too. So, I literally changed my looks with their tourist inventory. Now, I broke step 4 by creating an embarrassing scene in step 3. After several hours, it became time to return to the hotel without running into Bob again. I called a taxi to pick me up at the pub. They actually called the pub when they were curbside to pick me up. And I got back safe and sound with my new tourist outfit. So, the most vulnerable person on the street happens to be Bob's worst nightmare. This story illustrates the Defender Confidence video principles. So, the following video you will see in this series is the appropriate force versus maximum force, and this mugging story illustrates the concepts of appropriate force as many times as being the correct choice to make, especially for me being in a foreign country. Make sure to hit the subscription button on my YouTube channel so you won't miss any of these powerful training videos. The ultimate goal is to have the appropriate force, which means no physical force at all. None. I had some fans who read the pre-production of this story ask me what if the German thing didn't work. Well, in that case, that is where a good defender's self-defense tool would come in handy.